my students and the horsewomen that I know, you may have a hard time getting your big, heavy Western saddle up onto your horse. A lot of this trouble is coming from how you girls are trying to swing your saddle up, and I see a lot of trying to hold it under the cantle and the swells and lift it. And I think we see this because we see a lot of guys doing saddles this way because they can get away with it, or even better yet, grabbing the top of the saddle horn and just like hoisting it up there. There is no way that I could do that on this big horse Dylan here. He's about 16 one hands, and my saddle weighs about 35 pounds. There's just no way I can lift that like that. So instead, what we're gonna do is we're gonna hold it completely differently. Our left hand is gonna hold right under the cantle as close to this concho as you can get, and that's gonna give you a nice amount of leverage to be able to hang your saddle off of your hip like this. So really you're holding it with your hip and your left hand primarily. Then your right hand's gonna come right into the gullet, basically where the bar of your saddle comes out. And you're gonna hang on to that so that when you go to swing it, it's gonna stabilize the saddle and make it a little bit easier to swing. So typically I like to saddle my horses from the offside. So the offside's gonna be the right side of the horse, and the onside will be the left side. So currently we're on Dylan's offside, and the reason I prefer to saddle from the offside is because when I'm saddling colts, I want to minimize the amount of times I have to cross in front of them to get them saddled if they're not very good at saddling yet, if that's something new to them. Also, if I'm saddling a lot of horses in one day, it's more efficient. I don't have to cross in front of or behind the horse nearly so many times if I start from the offside. Totally personal preference though. If you want to do this completely opposite of how I'm doing it and carry it on your right hip, that is fine with me. Just up to you, and however it feels more comfortable. So the first step we're gonna do is we're gonna swing our saddle pad up. And you don't have to hold your saddle while you're doing this necessarily. I'm just gonna do it for the sake of this video. So I'm gonna swing my saddle pad up onto my horse, and I like to start with it farther forward because if you notice when you look at your horse's hair, it lays in this direction on his back. So if I were to put the saddle pad further back and drag it forward, now I've ruffled up all of his hair, which is gonna make him a little uncomfortable. And of course, we wanna try to make him as comfortable as possible during our riding process. So I'm gonna start forward and slide back. I want to keep my saddle pad from getting onto his flank because that's going to, again, be uncomfortable for him. It also, some horses, if the saddle pad sits too far back, will start getting a little wear spot here in their loin area from the pad rubbing them. So if we have any extra pad, we want to make sure that's actually coming out in front of the saddle. I also make a point of trying to pull their mane out from under the pad too because that's just another thing to get bunched up under there and, again, be uncomfortable. When I'm ready to go ahead and toss my saddle up onto the horse, I'm gonna place my right hand on the front of my bar here, and I'm gonna give a couple of fake swings, and then I'll bend my knees, and I'll give a really big swing all the way up, and I'll toss my saddle up that way. So generally it takes some practice to get to where you can get it to land exactly where you want, and sometimes it doesn't always land exactly where you want. So it's a teeny bit cockeyed right now. My saddle needs to come forward on the pad. So I can go ahead and grab this D-ring that my cinch is connected to and kind of shimmy it forward. I'm also, let's get him scooted so you guys can see a little bit better. Oh, good boy, Dylan. I'm also gonna be really picky about making sure the stitching on my saddle lines up with the very center of the pad. A lot of these pads will have some kind of seam down the middle that you can line that up with really nicely. And then, I'm also going to want to take a moment and bring the front of my saddle pad up into the gullet of my saddle as far as I can. This will, as you're riding, come down some, but we want to try to provide as much wither relief for our horses as possible so we're not putting pressure right on top of their withers right there. Since I'm already on this side, I can go ahead and let my cinches down. This would be a good opportunity to make sure everything is laying flat. My saddles get used on multiple horses during the day, so I also need to check for size. And the best way to do that is to push your cinch to his midline, and you should see that these little D-rings on the cinch end up staying just this side of his midline. If they're at the midline or if they're across the midline, when you go to tighten it up on the other side, you'll find that your cinch is a little bit too long. If they're way up the side here, that's going to be a cinch that's a little bit too short. So I can do the same thing with the back cinch, and they're looking pretty good size-wise. So I'm going to go ahead and cross behind him, ask him to step over. Good boy. I get all of this lined out here. So typically I like to go ahead and hang my stirrup up on the saddle horn, especially when I'm teaching, because it just makes it easier for you guys to see. But even when I'm not, I feel like it's more out of the way. But either way, whether you want it down or up is really personal preference again. So when I go to reach for my cinch, I want to make sure that I'm using my hand nearest to the horse, so it's going to be my left hand, and I'm facing his tail. If I reach under this way and he were to get spooked and jump towards me all of a sudden, his shoulder will push my hip out of the way, and I'm not going to end up under him. If I were facing the opposite direction and I reach under, I'm really putting myself in a vulnerable position to get his feet in my face, if he were, his front feet anyway, in my face, if he were to suddenly spin around. So I'm going to face his tail, reach under. I'll talk to you at the end about how I put my latigos away, but I'm going to put my latigo through the buckle of the cinch. I'll go back up through the D-ring, and I'll come back down through the buckle again. And here's where a lot of people do this differently than I do. I do not go ahead and cut my horse in half and get this all the way tight right off the bat. It's been my experience that creates really cinchy and sour horses when you're saddling them. So instead, I'm just going to gently tighten. And you can see he actually picked his head up a little bit, and that's going to be my signal that I've tightened it enough for right now. And it's really pretty loose still, but while he's standing here tied, it should not go anywhere. So you want it snug enough for the job that he's doing right at the moment. And then when I walk him out to the arena, I might tighten it one more time. And then before I get on, after I do my groundwork, that's going to be my final check. So I typically tighten my cinch 3 different times. When I go to do my back cinch, same drill. I'm going to stay facing his tail, reach under for my back cinch. A lot of times I see these back cinches super loose, where they're hanging down like this. And it's very easy for a horse to kick up at a fly under their belly or who knows what and end up actually hobbling a hind leg to their back cinch. So if you can imagine what a wreck that would be, just a bad day for everybody. So instead, I'm going to make sure to snug that up. If your horse is not good with a back cinch, take it off. There's no reason to just have one hanging down, and I guarantee you if it is hanging that loose, it's not even doing anything anyway, so you won't notice the difference if you do take it off. Riding with a back cinch is kind of a preference, and it depends on what job you're doing. If you're going to be dragging logs or roping and dallying, you're going to want a back cinch. Otherwise, it's really kind of optional depending on your style of riding and what you're doing. So that is basically how we're going to get the saddle on. So now we're going to talk about when we undo the saddle and how we do up our cinches. So we're going to do everything in reverse order. And I do want to mention, if I did have a breast collar on, my sequence would be front cinch, and then I have the option of doing my breast collar or my back cinch. It doesn't really matter which one of those you do first. But your front cinch is the one that actually holds the saddle onto the horse. Your other 2 straps would be stabilizing straps. So it's key that this is the first thing that goes on and the last thing to come off. So if I had a breast collar on now, I might take my breast collar off. Then I'm going to undo my back cinch. And again, we just want to kind of worst case scenario in our mind to keep ourselves safe. So if he blew up for some reason right now, this saddle would still stay on him. If I took my front cinch off first and left the back cinch on and that happened, it could very easily roll around and slide underneath him, which is going to be a really big wreck. So I'm going to undo my front cinch now, and again, I'm just staying in that habit of facing his tail, even though I'm not really putting my face anywhere vulnerable now. And I'm going to tie up my latigo here in a way that's going to make it very easy to undo it later. So I'm going to go up and under, and I'm going to create 2 loops, and then I'm going to tie that latigo around itself. And it just makes it a nice package for later, so I can just undo it and it all comes out. The way I generally see people putting their latigos away is in big circles. So they'll create a couple of circles. And while that might look nice for now, later when you come to get it out, it tends to be kind of sticky and a little bit harder to get out than if you go up and under, make your 2 loops, and tie them together. I also have a way that I prefer to put my cinches up on this side. Good boy. And that would be, I'm going to take the big buckle from my front cinch, and I'm going to get the tongue of that buckle and put it through the small buckle on my back cinch. And then I'm going to turn it, and this is where it gets everybody confused. I'm going to turn it and put my leather in through the top of my buckle. And I'll get this a little bit undone here so you can see it better. There we go. So it should all lay nice and flat like this. The traditional way I see this done is everyone turns it and then puts leather through, and your cinch will kind of get a funny kink to it, and it won't last nearly as long if you do it this way. So I'll show you that one more time. Get the big buckle of our front cinch, find the tongue of it. We're gonna put our back cinch through it. Everything is like twisting on me. There we go. Back cinch through. So it's just sitting on the tongue of that buckle. Then we're gonna go up to our leather, poke our leather through, and buckle it. And then it's gonna hang nice and flat. So now, when I wanna take my saddle down, I shouldn't be tripping over my latigo or my cinches or any of that. And I can just put it right back on my hip and head back to my saddle rack. I'm Ashley Purdue with Pioneer Horsemanship. I hope you guys found this tip helpful, and I'll see you all next time.